I wanted to quickly touch on the 70-20-10 model, which I think a lot of folks are familiar with. If you could just give an overview of kind of like what is it and what is it not, and how
Sure.
should folks
Yeah.
be thinking about applying that model?
Yeah. And I think, over the last 25 years that I've been working with it with 70-20-10 and developed the strategies around it and so on, I think a lot of people know about 70-20-10, but I think there are a lot of misapprehensions about 70-20-10. I always describe 70-20-10 as a framework or a reference model. And what it helps doing, and in fact, Bob Eichinger, who created what he calls the meme 70-20-10 at the Center for Creative Leadership. Well, Bob was working at PepsiCo, but at the Center for Creative Leadership in North Carolina. It's a reference model which just helps expand our thinking about learning and other practices which are going to build better organizational outcomes. So I always say, if you're thinking about 70-20-10, don't get hung up on the numbers. They're just a sort of a placeholder to say, hey, are you aware that vast majority of the work of the learning that occurs through learning with others, through collaborating, sharing, networking, coaching, and so on, learning from working. That's where most of the learning happens. And the formal learning, just because it's a smaller amount, doesn't mean it's not important. It's important, but it has its place. So I think that for me, that's the key thing. And I've had so many discussions over the years, and I can point people, if they want to Bob Eichinger's, to a discussion that Bob Eichinger and another chap and I had about 10 years ago, talking about all the research behind this. And that'll help you get over, if you're stuck in the numbers, that'll help you get over the numbers. But what 70-20-10 does, I think, as I say, I think there's lots of misconceptions about it. So first of all, it's not some sort of face that you put on formal training. It's a different way to look at how we build capability for organizations, for teams, and for individuals. It's not a theory, it's not a learning theory, it's a framework. It's just, we've built a methodology on it. A couple of colleagues and I at the Institute, the 70-20-10 Institute, wrote a book a few years ago. It's not a fixed ratio, and it's not a way to think of learning in separate approaches, because it's actually integrative in a way of, most good formal learning should involve some collaborative learning and also bring in some experiential and learning from work. Most collaborative learning will maybe draw on some formal learning and bring in. So basically, it's an integrative approach. So the other things that 70-20-10 isn't, it's not the same as blended learning. Blended learning is simply taking different channels and bringing them again within the formal learning bit. So blended learning sits within the formal, in the 10 bit, and it's just where you're using different channels in order to provide that learning, usually content-driven learning, sometimes nice hybrid learning where you've got a lot of experiential learning and so on. And a lot of the early stuff I did in the 1980s and 90s around collaborative-based learning was very much around, that was a bit like early blended learning. We were using collaboration tools and getting people to share experiences and work through case studies and so on. But that's in the 10. Also, 70-20-10 isn't what we call 10 plus, which is just adding some collaborative learning, some social learning, maybe some networking, maybe some coaching, and some experiential, maybe some work back in the workplace, to formal learning. That's what we call 10 plus. And again, it's really based around the 10, but it's starting at the 10 and building out. And that's what I'd call really good formal learning. And I'll put a little link down there to an article or a paper by a colleague of mine at the 70-20-10 Institute. If you just go to the 70-20-10 Institute, you'll find quite a lot of things around this. So that's what it's not. So the way I see 70-20-10, it's an approach to build a culture of continuous improvement. And it's a model which helps create value and deliver, organizational goals and so on. It's a tool to help refocus from learning to performance. And that's a big one, putting on our performance mindset hat rather than our learning mindset hat. And it's, as the third point says, it's a mindset to help learning where most of it happens, which is out in the workplace. In fact, the European Centre for Education and the Labour Market, who are a group of economists, have done some research that indicated that about 96% of the time spent learning is during the daily, when we're out working, not when we're sitting in classrooms or doing e-learning. And lastly, the fourth point there It's actually, I see 70-20-10 as a lever to increase the impact of managers, of HR, of talent, and learning and development professionals, to actually give us a lever and a suite of approaches which can really help build high-level capability. And I mentioned a book that Jos Harritz and Vivian Heinen and I published 9 years ago now. We use this little diagram here, which again takes from the early work from 1901, saying that when learning occurs as part of work, it's usually likely to be more effective because context is critical. Actually, this graph here was originated, or a version of it originated with some work from IBM, who looked at the realized value you can deliver for your organization, and moving from the left to the right in work to the right there, we have a culture of continuous development where learning is integrated to work. And the IBM researchers, well, the researchers at IBM Consulting, showed that as you move further out and integrated learning with work, you could release higher value into the organization. So I think that's, let me just stop sharing there for a minute. Yeah. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea about, what 70-20-10 is and isn't. Often people say to me, hey, Charles, can you have a look at this? We've got a great program, a 70-20-10 program based around 70-10 principles. And when I look at it, you invariably say it's a great program. What you're doing is 10 plus, which you've built a structured program, and you've integrated all these other elements. Fantastic. It's 10 plus. It's not 70-20-10. 70-20-10, you start with the 70 and work out how you can exploit all that learning that occurs within work. So you can embed learning in work and extract learning from work, and then you can work backwards.